Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video we're doing something that I haven't done in a while, and that's looking back on some stuff in the NBA. Today it's going to be looking back at 2014 NBA draft class grades over here on SB Nation. And really quickly before we get started, if you like the NBA and you enjoy this type of content, then be sure to subscribe. I upload basically every single day. Okay, so what we're doing here, and I've done this in the past, I haven't done it in a while though, basically just looking back and kind of seeing what people had to say about different things throughout NBA history. And if you guys have some suggestions for things that you would like for me to look back on, whether it's NBA draft stuff or trade deadline stuff or just any kind of stuff, an article, a video, whatever it may be sure to leave that down in the comment section below and I'll definitely take a look. And we're going to begin here. Again, this is the 2014 draft, so there's context here. We didn't really know what was going to happen with LeBron at the time because the draft was before free agency. And obviously Wiggins ended up going to the Minnesota Timberwolves in exchange for Kevin Love once LeBron ended up deciding to come back to Cleveland, and he ended up going first overall. And here it says that the Cavaliers surprised everyone last year when they took Anthony Bennett first overall. Yeah, they did, unfortunately, but didn't pull any fast ones this year, picking Andrew Wiggins with the top selection. And Wiggins was a player that a lot of people really liked. They loved his upside. Some people even made some pretty lofty comparisons for him. And the thought was that he was going to be so good defensively that even if it didn't come along for him immediately offensively, that he would get there eventually because he was such a great athlete. And initially his first couple of seasons in Minnesota, he was really good scoring wise and things like that. And then once the team started to get better with Jimmy Butler's arrival, he just really struggled to find his ideal fit and is still to a certain extent trying to find that. Never developed in the kind of defensive play that people would hope that he would be. So he definitely is not the best player out of this draft class. Number 2 was Jabari Parker. It says Milwaukee needed a star to put a face on its rebuild, and Jabari Parker is that star. Funnily enough, it ended up being Giannis instead of Jabari Parker, but he was still really good at first with Milwaukee. He struggled a little bit to stay on the court and had some season-ending injuries, but the debate was definitely between him and Wiggins in terms of players that were healthy at the top of this draft for who should go number 1. And Jabari Parker was a really good college player, a front court scorer that was kind of perfect for the way the game is played now. Unfortunately, just couldn't stay healthy. He's having a little bit of a resurgence now in Atlanta, but has bounced around the league a little bit and just was never able to get it together. And it's unfortunate because he would be perfect for this Milwaukee team right now as well, now that he's kind of gotten a little bit more used to playing off the ball. But at the time, it was definitely a justified selection. Number 3 now is a really, really interesting one, and of course it's Joel Embiid. It says this is the second draft in a row that Philadelphia has come away with an injured big man after trading for Nerlens Noel last year. Embiid suffered a stress fracture in his foot and will miss at least 4 to 6 months. It also mentions that if he was healthy, he probably would have been the number 1 overall pick, and that's debatable because people understood how talented this guy was, but again, a lot of the conversation was around Wiggins or Parker at number 1. But Embiid has become, in my opinion, unless we're getting to someone later that I'm completely blanking on, the best player in this entire draft class, and as one of the more dominant forces in the entire league when healthy, and there are still injury concerns with him moving forward. But it's interesting that he went behind the 2 guys that he did. Number 4 now, Aaron Gordon. Orlando made the first surprising move of the draft, nabbing Gordon with the 4th pick. Gordon is a high character guy with elite athleticism, but plays the same position as many of Orlando's prospects. And this has continued to be an issue for Orlando for the last couple of years, really just continuing to invest in the front court and not really, getting the kind of backcourt help that they need. And this was the case even when Gordon was drafted. And he's been a good player, some seasons better than others, but has never really been in an ideal fit for his skill set. And maybe eventually he will be. He signed a nice second contract and continues to develop as, one of the better athletes in the league. But I don't want to say he's been disappointing, but, just not an ideal situation for him, and I think that we could have seen more out of him to this point in his career, but a lot of that has to do with the situation that he's in. Moving on now to number 5, Dante Exum with the Utah Jazz, and he actually recently got traded, as many of you know. It says the Australian mystery man fell into Utah's lap after most observers assumed Orlando would snatch him up with the 4th pick. He's an instant upgrade over Trey Burke at the point, but there's also a chance the two form a modern 2-point guard backcourt. Dante Exum was supposed to be kind of the guard of the future, a bigger guy that could play make and could defend, and was supposed to be, one of the more talented players in this draft class, and unfortunately just hasn't been able to stay healthy at any point in his career and was never really all that impactful for Utah, unfortunately for him. Number 6 now, Marcus Smart, a really interesting player because there were points in Marcus Smart's career where people thought that maybe this guy was going to be the number 1 overall pick because he was so big, he was so strong, and such a good scorer and playmaker in college. Ended up going number 6 in this year that he ended up coming out. It says the former Oklahoma State Cowboy is a gritty combo guard who can work alongside either Rajon Rondo or Avery Bradley. A backcourt of Rondo and Smart will terrorize NBA backcourts for years to come if Boston chooses to hang on to its incumbent point guard. Obviously, eventually they did end up trading Rondo to Dallas, but Smart has been a really important piece for this team for the last handful of years. He's a fan favorite, a guy that hustles and makes all of the small plays, still can't shoot the ball extremely well, but it's been in a really good situation for himself there in Boston for the last couple of years. Number 7 now, Julius Randle, says this is a perfect pick for the Lakers, who will inevitably look to compete in the Western Conference next year. Randle has an NBA-ready body, he crushes opponents on the glass, and can bully his way for buckets inside. And this was another interesting situation because he got hurt relatively early on in his rookie season and made some impact in LA, but never really broke out until he left I think it was 2 summers ago at this point to go play in New Orleans, and now obviously he's in New York. Still a really talented player, but maybe not someone that fits really well in one particular spot. Gonna be a really productive player, but there's definitely some things he can work on in his game defensively and things like that. And now we get a little bit more into bust territory, right? Like there's the Dante Exum thing that's definitely a bust. But now we're really getting into it. Number 8 is the Sacramento Kings. Nik Stauskas. It says Stauskas isn't nearly the athlete that Ben McLemore is, but he's a fantastic shooter and can create offense off the dribble. This was a guy that I thought was going to be really good. For me personally, I wasn't an ideal situation at all for him to be in Sacramento, as it is for most draft picks coming into the league. You don't really want to end up with the Kings, but it just never worked out for him. He ended up getting traded away pretty early on in his career, and to this point still just hasn't really found his place as a shooter in the league. Number 9, Noah Vonleh, another guy that got traded pretty soon after he was drafted, was supposed to be this really versatile front court player and just never really developed. Had a nice season last year with the Knicks, but never just figured it out for whatever reason. Number 10, Elfrid Payton, a really interesting player once again, and I think that I'm trying to remember the sequence of events here. There was some kind of trade, and I think Dario Saric Dario Saric is there down the road, and Elfrid Payton ended up going to Orlando and just was never, exactly what they needed there. He's someone that needed a lot of shooting around him, was a good playmaker and defender, but they needed a little bit more scoring out of that spot, and he just wasn't able to provide it and just kind of bounced around the league with, varying success with a couple of different teams. Number 11 now, Doug McDermott. This was a spot that, as it says in the article, a lot of people thought was a really good fit for McDermott as someone that was going to be a shooter off the ball on some Bulls teams that was supposed to be pretty good, and that just never really worked out for him. He got a nice contract to go to Indiana, and he's still someone that can shoot the ball really well, but in college was more of like an all-around scorer type guy. You knew coming into the NBA he was going to be more of a shooting specialist, but again, another guy that just hasn't really 100% worked out for him to this point, at least in terms of what his ceiling was. And then we're getting to number 12 and Dario Saric. And again, this was a situation where the Sixers, I believe, traded back. I don't remember off the top of my head. Saric will stay in Europe for the next 2 years, but that's perfectly fine with Philadelphia, a team well aware it's in this rebuild for the long haul. And so this is an interesting situation. This is a Philadelphia team that came away from this draft with the 3rd pick and the 12th pick, and neither guy played for them at all in their first season, and for a good amount of the next season as well with Embiid. So it's just kind of strange that they got 2 picks so high, and then neither one of those guys ended up helping them, and we know that was all just part of the process. Number 13 now, this is a really, really interesting pick, was Zach LaVine, who again went behind other guards like Elfrid Payton, like Nik Stauskas, like Marcus Smart, like Dante Exum, and for the first couple of years there looked like probably the best guy out of that group, and is still a really good player for the Bulls now after the Jimmy Butler trade. But this is a guy that's been a really high level scorer pretty much since his first season and a half was over in the league. Unfortunately had an injury that kind of held him back a little bit there, but he's come back stronger than ever, and is a really, really impactful scorer. Continues to have some issues in terms of getting his team to win some basketball games, but there's other situations involved in that. Number 14 now, TJ Warren of my very own NC State Wolfpack was the ACC Player of the year that he came out. One of the best scorers in the draft, and someone that I still really like as a shooter and as a scorer. Continues to work on his game because he could not shoot the basketball at at all in college outside of 15 feet. It's definitely improved, and there's another guy just like Doug McDermott that now finds himself on the Pacers. Number 15 now. And this is a guy that I was so convinced was going to be really good when he came into the NBA out of Michigan State. And it's Adrian Payne, who went 15th to the Hawks. Just watching this guy play, he was so talented, was a pretty good athlete, but had such a good shooting stroke as a big guy that I thought he would be perfect. And it never worked out. I'm pretty sure he ended up getting traded to Minnesota, and it just, for whatever reason, man, like he couldn't figure it out. And I really thought that he was going to be such a good player. Now we get to 16 for the Denver Nuggets. Yusef Nurkic. And again, an interesting situation because him and Nikola Jokic ended up being on the same team, and they kind of felt like they had to pick one because they couldn't figure out a way to get them to play together. He gets traded to Portland for, I believe, Mason Plumlee, and now has kind of found his fit. Unfortunately, he's recovering from an injury currently, but is a really good player for Portland. And then Jokic obviously is an outstanding player for Denver as well. But it was a legitimate debate there for a little bit in terms of which guy they were going to end up keeping. Number 17 now, James Young. Not much to talk about here. Never really played for this team. People were excited about him and this Celtics draft in general at the time that they brought him and Marcus Smart in as part of a really talented Kentucky team, but just never translated his game to the NBA. And then, there's a couple of other guys here like that, like Tyler Ennis, never really translated, Bruno Caboclo, the Brazilian, Kevin Durant, Mitch McGary, who had a couple of good games, but never really did a whole lot. Jordan Adams was kind of up and down. Rodney Hood's actually been pretty good over the last couple of years specifically. But the big guy here to talk about and number 19 is Gary Harris, which again shows you how good this draft was for Denver. Obviously, Nurkic didn't stay with them for very long, and they ended up getting Mason Plumlee out of it. But they also get a guy like Gary Harris, and it says Denver had a very successful draft day. It traded the number 11 pick to Chicago and came away with Nurkic, a high upside center prospect. Then it found a very good two-way guard in Harris. The former Michigan State Spartan is a three-point shooter. He can defend either guard spot. He should have gone much higher than number 19. And he's had, kind of a rough last year and a half or so offensively. But when he's right, Gary Harris is a really good defensive player that can shoot, that can play make, and is kind of ideal from a versatility standpoint at the two guard. So a really good pick there at number 19. And beyond that, like I said, we've got Rodney Hood, Shabazz Napier, who didn't really do a whole lot initially, but is, kind of found his role throughout the league. I'm pretty sure it says here as well, this was the guy that LeBron really wanted the Heat to pick, and then he ended up leaving, obviously. 25, Clint Capela. I specifically remember when I watched the draft, people really hating on this Clint Capela pick because at the time, I guess people thought that they needed other things. They didn't really need a big guy. I guess 2014, Dwight is still in Houston. I could be wrong about that, but I guess 2014, they were kind of set at the big spot, and they didn't really, people didn't understand the reason why they got Capela. They thought he was too young, and they just thought he wasn't any good, and obviously he ended up proving them wrong and is perfect now for their system. Beyond that, Bogdan Bogdanovic at 27 is an interesting pick there as well. Josh Huestis is a guy that I guess got signed to like the G League team in Oklahoma City, all the way there at 29. And then number 30, Kyle Anderson, Slow-Mo, who's now in Memphis and has been a pretty productive player. So when you look up and down, like when you're talking about 1 through 30, there's a lot of, highly productive players that are in the league now. Obviously, this draft is over 5 years ago now at this point. But there's a lot of really interesting and productive players to look at throughout this as a really good draft depth-wise at the top. I mean, Embiid is the guy at the top of this draft, and then there's some other players, like LaVine and Randle and Wiggins to a certain extent. So it's definitely one of the more interesting drafts, I would say, the last decade or so, and a really productive one, and again, just an interesting one to kind of look back on. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.